Welcome back to Coding. I'm Cody.
I'm Katie.
Today, we're going to be looking at a
Oh.
whole stack of recent cybersecurity incidents that kind of have us asking, like, is anything truly secure anymore?
Yeah, that's a good question these days.
So buckle up. This one's going to be a wild ride.
It is.
All right. Let's start with this AWS data leak. Thousands of customers got hit because of misconfigured cloud instances and not only
Yeah.
sensitive information exposed,
Right.
logins,
Right.
API keys, even source code.
Oh.
But it seems the hackers themselves made a bit of a rookie mistake.
Oh, wow.
They stored all that stolen data
Yeah.
in an unprotected AWS database.
Really?
It almost feels poetic.
The irony, it does highlight a crucial point, though. We talk a lot about that shared responsibility model in the cloud. AWS provides the infrastructure,
Mhm.
but securing the data within it is up to the user. Right. Even beyond the technical know-how, there's a human element at play here.
Yeah.
Why are so many configurations going wrong? Is it a lack of awareness, training, or just the sheer complexity of these systems?
Yeah, it's a bit like, those car alarm commercials.
Oh.
They show you all the fancy features,
Oh.
but they don't tell you how long it takes to program the darn thing.
Yeah.
Or how easy it is to accidentally set it off with your elbow.
Right.
So,
That makes sense.
okay. Shifting gears to something a bit more. Shall we say cloak and dagger?
Ooh.
We've got articles here about Salt Typhoon,
Uh-huh.
a Chinese hacking group that infiltrated major U.S. telecom networks.
I read about this.
And this is being called one of the biggest intelligence compromises in history.
Wow.
8 major networks, all compromised. It really makes you wonder what kind of data they were after and what it means for individuals' privacy.
Right.
Is this about espionage, disruption,
Yeah.
or something else entirely?
Yeah, it's not just a data breach. It's a potential window into millions of lives.
Exactly. And this incident has sparked some serious debate, particularly around Senator Ron Wyden's proposed Secure American Communications Act, which aims to tighten cybersecurity regulations for telecom companies. But is that enough? What kind of impact would stricter protocols and audits have on these massive networks? And how do you even begin to enforce them on a global scale?
Those are good questions.
A bit of Pandora's box. The more interconnected our world becomes, the more vulnerable we are.
Yeah.
And it's not just governments and corporations at risk, it's all of us.
Absolutely.
And it's not just telecoms, right?
Yeah.
We've got articles here about everything, from heart surgery devices
Oh, wow.
to Bitcoin ATMs being compromised.
It's scary how much is connected now.
It is. Speaking of vulnerable, remember that massive zero-day vulnerability Microsoft had to scramble to patch?
Yeah.
CVA 2024-49138. It impacted millions of Windows users. And here's the kicker. Exploits targeting the Windows common log file system, like this one, are often used in ransomware attacks. Not only is your data at risk, but your entire system could be held hostage. And this isn't just some theoretical threat. We're seeing it play out in real time.
Right.
A ransomware group called Termite hit Blue Yonder, a major supply chain software company, disrupting operations for huge companies like Starbucks and major grocery chains.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah. And this is what I find so unsettling. We think of ransomware as targeting individuals or maybe small businesses. But when it hits a company like Blue Yonder, the impact ripples out, disrupting everyday life for potentially millions of people. A cup of coffee suddenly becomes a casualty of a cyber attack.
Wow.
And it underscores a point we've been circling around. These attacks aren't just random acts of mischief anymore. They're calculated, strategic, and increasingly tied to nation-state agendas.
That's like cyber warfare.
Yeah. In fact, the U.S. government recently sanctioned a Chinese cybersecurity firm, 6-1 Silence, for its alleged role in a massive ransomware campaign.
Really?
Yep.
I hadn't heard about that.
And this raises so many questions. Is this a sign of escalating cyber warfare? What message is the U.S. government trying to send, and how will China respond? Is this going to make individuals and businesses more vulnerable or less?
Yeah.
It's a dangerous game, and it's hard to predict the consequences, but one thing is clear. The lines between the physical and digital worlds are blurring, and the stakes are getting higher.
Definitely.
Okay, let's take a step back from geopolitics for a moment and zoom in on something that might seem less dramatic, but is equally concerning. Vulnerabilities in everyday software.
Okay.
Security researchers found a flaw in 3 popular file sharing tools, Lexicom, VL Transfer, and Harmony. all developed by the same company, Clio, the flaw. An unrestricted file upload and download vulnerability. Essentially means hackers could have free reign over your data.
Oh, wow.
Think about how many people use file sharing tools. For work, for personal files, for sensitive documents. It's become so commonplace that we rarely stop to consider the risks. And what's even more troubling is that Clio initially released a patch for the bug, but it didn't fully fix the problem.
Really?
So it's not just about companies needing to do better. It's also about us as users. Understanding that security is a shared responsibility. We can't just blindly trust that our software is secure. We need to be informed, take precautions,
Yeah.
and be wary of potential risks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of things we might not think about, thousands of Bitcoin ATM users might have had their personal information compromised due to a breach at Byte Federal.
Bitcoin ATMs.
Yeah.
I feel like most people don't even know those exist.
Right. But apparently there are a lot of them out there. And this breach potentially exposed names, addresses, transaction history, you name it, of 58,000 users.
Wow.
And it all stemmed from a vulnerability in third-party software that Byte Federal was using.
So again, we see this recurring theme.
Exactly.
The weakest link in the chain. It doesn't matter how secure your own systems are. If you're relying on third-party vendors who aren't taking security as seriously, it's like having a state-of-the-art security system in your house, but leaving your back door unlocked.
Exactly. And the thing is, most people probably don't even realize they're interacting with a third-party vendor. When they use a Bitcoin ATM, it was just another machine, another transaction. But behind the scenes, there's a whole network of systems and companies involved, each with its own potential vulnerabilities.
It's a bit unnerving when you think about it.
It is. And this makes me wonder, is the average user even equipped to evaluate the security practices of every company they interact with? I mean, I barely have time to read the privacy policies of the apps I use, let alone research the cybersecurity posture of every vendor involved.
What do you mean?
It's a lot to keep track of. And honestly, it feels like the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know.
Yeah.
This brings us to some fascinating research on the U.S. energy sector. A report highlighted some alarming vulnerabilities, particularly the reliance on third-party vendors. They found that these third-party risks account for a whopping 45% of breaches in the energy sector.
That's a lot.
And get this, 67% of those breaches were linked to software and IT vendors.
Really?
It's like building a fortress around your power plant, but leaving the keys with the pizza delivery guy.
That's a good analogy.
And what's really striking is the disparity between traditional oil and gas companies and renewable energy firms. Oil and gas tend to have stronger cybersecurity, perhaps because they've been a target for so long. But renewables, while promoting a sustainable future, are lagging behind.
That's interesting.
Is this because they're newer to the game, or is it something inherent in the way renewable energy systems are designed? They're all about interconnectedness. Smart grids, solar farms, wind installations, all rely on complex networks and data sharing. But that also creates more points of entry for hackers.
It's a trade-off. We want cleaner energy, but we also need to make sure it's secure.
Exactly.
A cyber attack on a power grid could have devastating consequences, especially as we become more reliant on renewables.
Right. And speaking of new threats, researchers discovered a sneaky way for malware to hide in plain sight by hijacking Windows accessibility features.
Wait, what?
Accessibility features.
The one's designed to help people with disability.
Exactly. Things like screen readers and voice control, they require deep system access to function. But that also makes them a potential target for hackers. Researchers found that a feature called UI automation can be abused for malicious purposes.
So the malware is basically disguised as a helpful tool.
That's a good way to put it. It can mimic legitimate user actions, making it incredibly difficult for security software to detect, because technically, it's authorized by the user through those accessibility features.
That's so sneaky.
It is.
It's like something out of a sci-fi thriller.
Yeah.
It's not just about viruses or brute force attacks anymore. It's about exploiting the very tools designed to make our lives easier.
Exactly. And it underscores the need for more sophisticated security solutions. That can go beyond just scanning for known threats. We need systems that can analyze behavior patterns, identify anomalies, and understand the intent behind actions, even when they appear legitimate.
It's like having a security guard who can tell the difference between someone who's genuinely lost their key and someone who's picking the lock.
Right.
It requires a deeper level of understanding, a sense of intuition almost.
All right. Let's take a breath for a second.
Okay.
That was a lot to process.
I know, right? It feels like every time we turn around, there's a new threat, a new vulnerability, a new reason to be paranoid.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
before we spiral into a full-blown existential crisis, let's remember that there are things we can do to protect ourselves.
Right.
And that's what part 3 is all about. We'll shift gears from doom and gloom to empowerment and talk about actionable steps you can take to stay safe in this crazy digital world. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Calm Coding.
I'm glad to be back.
We've spent the last 2 parts exploring the Wild West of cybersecurity, the vulnerabilities, the attacks, the ever-evolving threats.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
But it's not all doom and gloom. This part is all about action, what we can do
Yeah.
to navigate this digital landscape
Yeah.
with a bit more. Well, calm.
I like it.
So
Yeah.
we've thrown a lot at you, maybe even enough to make your head spin a bit. But amidst all the complexity and frankly scary stuff, are there any common threads, any foundational things people can focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it starts with something we've touched on throughout this whole deep dive, awareness.
Right.
It's like learning self-defense, right?
Yeah.
The first step isn't mastering some crazy martial arts move. It's knowing your surroundings, sensing when something's off in the digital world. That means understanding the landscape, the tactics hackers use, the vulnerabilities they exploit. We've covered a lot of that already, so kudos for making it this far. You're ahead of the game.
Exactly.
But awareness is just the beginning. It needs to translate into action. And that's what we'll focus on now. Concrete steps to make your digital life more secure.
Yeah.
The most basic and often overlooked step. Keep your software updated.
Yeah.
I know. Those pop-ups can be annoying, but they often contain crucial security fixes. Think of it like those routine car maintenance appointments.
Okay.
Boring, maybe, but they prevent major breakdowns down the line.
Right.
Speaking of things we tend to put off, let's talk passwords.
Oh,
We all hate them, but they're still the first line of defense for
Food.
so many accounts. And using the same weak password everywhere is like using the same key for your house, your car,
Yeah.
and your safe deposit box.
Right.
So unique, strong passwords for everything.
But realistically, how do we manage that?
Right, that's a lot. This is where password managers come in. They're like a digital vault for all your passwords
Right.
with one master password to unlock them.
Okay.
It takes away the mental gymnastics
Uh-huh.
of remembering dozens of complex strings of characters. Plus, many password managers can even generate strong passwords for you, taking the guesswork out of the equation. And while we're on the topic of locking things down, multi-factor authentication, folks. Enable it wherever you can. It adds an extra layer of security by requiring you to prove. It's really you trying to access an account.
Right.
It's like that extra lock on your front door. Or that security guard checking IDs. It might be a little inconvenient at first, but the peace of mind is worth it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair trade-off.
I agree.
So beyond the technical stuff, there's a lot we can do, simply by being more mindful of our digital habits. Think about those phishing scams we mentioned earlier. They often rely on us clicking on suspicious links or opening attachments from unknown senders.
Right.
Don't be afraid to be a little skeptical. Question everything. Hover over links to see where they actually lead. Check sender addresses carefully. It's like developing a healthy dose of digital street smarts.
I like that. Digital street smarts.
And always back up your important data.
Oh.
External hard drives, cloud storage, even those old school DVDs gathering dust somewhere.
Yeah.
The key is to have multiple backups in different locations. It's your insurance policy against ransomware attacks,
Right.
accidental deletions, even hardware failures.
It's so important.
Think of it like diversifying your investments. You wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Same goes for your data.
Exactly.
Last but not least, stay informed. The cybersecurity landscape is constantly evolving, so what we know today might be outdated tomorrow.
That's true.
There are tons of resources out there, cybersecurity blogs, podcasts like this one, of course, security experts on social media. Take a few minutes each week to read an article, listen to a podcast, or just browse some headlines. It's like staying up to date on the weather forecast, except instead of rain or shine, it's data breaches and malware.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So let's bring this full circle back to the name of our show, Calm Coding. Amidst all the scary headlines and warnings, how do we actually cultivate a sense of calm in this digital world?
That's the million-dollar question.
For me, it comes from that shift in perspective we talked about, moving from feeling helpless and overwhelmed to taking action, even small steps. It's about knowing that while we can't control every threat, we can control how we prepare and respond.
I think that's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in the fear, the what-ifs, but ultimately, security is about managing risk. not eliminating it entirely. And a lot of that comes down to making informed decisions, setting boundaries, and prioritizing what matters most.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a sense of empowerment, not anxiety. You're now armed with knowledge, tools, and hopefully a bit more awareness.
We hope so.
Remember, cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. There will always be new threats, new challenges. But by staying informed, taking precautions, and supporting each other, we can navigate this digital world with a bit more calm and a lot more confidence.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on Calm Coding. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the topics that matter to you. Stay safe out there and happy coding.